What do people believe about God today? There are a whole bunch of different ideas about God around today. There's slot machine God. Put in a prayer and out comes what you want. It's consumerism turned into God. Or Santa Claus God. God's biggest and greatest concern is my happiness, and it's just a projection of my self-centeredness. Or Managing Director God. Managing Director God rules the universe from his celestial office and really doesn't care very much about us. Well, different ideas about God are not new today. Things were no different in Paul's day, and so when Paul speaks in Athens, he addresses it. Athens was one of the great university cities of Paul's day, a kind of Oxford or Cambridge, full of intellectual life where philosophers debated ideas. Just notice in Acts 17:21 how all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. And Athens, as we'll see, was a city full of gods. So for Paul to communicate the Christian gospel in Athens, he had to engage with the beliefs of the local people, both positively and negatively. Let's notice first of all Athens as a city which verse 16 says was full of idols. When Paul arrived at the port of Athens, which was about 3 miles out of town, he quickly encounters statues and temples for the gods Demeter, Poseidon, and then Dionysius, Athena, Zeus and Apollo. Then on the 3-mile journey inland to the city, he'd meet Hestia, Aria, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, the Gemini twins, Serapis, and more temples of Zeus, Apollo and Dionysius. In the last part of the journey to the Acropolis, the large hill in the centre of the city, he'd meet Asclepius, Themis, Gaia and Demeter. And throughout the city there were statues to present and past Roman emperors who were worshipped as gods. Luke does not exaggerate when he says at the end of verse 16 that the city was full of idols. One scholar suggests we might translate it that it was a forest of idols, and that gets the sense well. And Paul was deeply distressed by these idols. Paul was in pain because of this. Paul is a man, remember, whose life is orientated round Jesus. His life has been transformed by his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, and nothing is more important to Paul than wanting to please and to honour Jesus in the way he lives and speaks. So it causes Paul pain when he sees all these idols. It's not a case of seeing them and being impressed by the beautiful workmanship of the statues and the temples as a tourist might be. What matters most to Paul is that Jesus is honoured and that the one true God is worshipped. And these idols are not just mistaken, but they are completely wrong. They're a deceptive way of thinking about life and worship. Now, our society today may not have so many statues and temples as its idols, but idolatry is alive and well in 21st century London in the form of money. The more you have, the happier you'll be, so people believe, until they have the money and discover they're not happy. Or status, climbing the greasy pole of promotion and status, or becoming something significant in politics or the local area, or the acquisition of stuff. Amazon wants us to have loads and loads of stuff. There are shops that are designed to sell us stuff because that's what we worship. Or for some people, it's particular politicians or political causes. And this isn't a comment on one particular kind of politics, because it's true of left and right. How can you tell if something's an idol? By whether you never criticise or disagree with it, by how much it drives the choices you make about how you use your time, your money and energy. Those are the things that make it an idol. It controls your life. And the danger for many of us as Christians is that we don't experience pain in the way Paul does, because we should be experiencing pain in the midst of idolatry today. But our danger is that we are so used to it that we feel comfortable in the midst of people and a culture that worships anything other than Jesus. Paul pictures the work of the Spirit as causing this pain in Romans 8, verses 22 and 23. We know, he says, that the whole creation has been groaning in labour pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly when we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Paul is saying that the Holy Spirit produces within Christians an experience of dissatisfaction with the way the world is, pictured as groaning inwardly, internal pain, like Paul experienced in Athens. It's a mark of our closeness to God the Holy Spirit, that we see the world as it truly is, and experience the pain in God's heart over a world that turns from him and worships other things and other beings rather than the one true God who's known in Jesus. So Paul experiences great pain. How does he respond then to this pain? Well, notice two things he doesn't do. First of all, he doesn't give in to the cultural setting and become a tourist who just admires the culture, its sculptures and temples, because his heart is focused on what honours Jesus, and these do not. Further, he doesn't just simply sit and listen to other people and say, well, I need to learn about your beliefs, I need to learn about the views you have. His society was as multicultural as ours is, and yet his first instinct is to proclaim Jesus. So, verse 17 says, he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout people. He goes to the synagogue and speaks to his fellow Jews about Jesus, as he does in any city he visits. But he also goes to the marketplace, verse 17, every day with those who happen to be there. The marketplace isn't just a place where stuff is sold. It's a marketplace of ideas. It's where people talk and discuss. And he argues for Jesus there. Look at the end of verse 18. He speaks the good news about Jesus and the resurrection, because that's the distinctive thing about Christian faith. We follow a man who died and was raised from the dead. The followers of other religious systems and philosophical schools all died, and their followers carried on their teaching. But Christians don't remember Jesus as a past figure. We experience him because he is alive and with us today, because God raised him from the dead at Easter. And among these people, Paul meets two particular groups, the Epicureans and the Stoics, verse 18. These are two groups of philosophers in Athens, and Paul debates the gospel with them. They think he's proclaiming foreign divinities, verse 18. Gods from other places who aren't known in Athens. And these two major philosophical schools had teaching schools in Athens. Now, for the Epicureans, life was about freedom from fear and bodily pain. Tranquility is what life's all about. They believe there's no life beyond death, so it's a case of making the most of what we have before death. Now, they weren't pleasure seekers in the way modern people are. They sought peace in knowledge, in friendship, and abstinence from excess in any area of life, including abstaining from sex as far as possible. They believed there were many gods, but they thought those gods just weren't interested in human life or affairs. So there's no possibility of communicating with the gods, no life after death. In some respects, they're like modern New Agers who seek unity and harmony with creation and who use meditation and crystals to seek inner peace. And they're very like Buddhists in most respects, particularly in believing that the gods don't engage with or interfere with humans. The Stoics were people for whom feelings come and go, but what should control people's lives is logic and rationality. So self-mastery and self-control are the critical things in life. And the Stoics look down on people who are controlled by their emotions. Pleasure and pain are irrelevant if you're a Stoic. They value courage, temperance, moderation, justice and wisdom as cardinal virtues. And there's really no such thing as good or evil for a Stoic. Events aren't good or bad in themselves. It's the human response to events that's important. They speak of a God, but this God is within the universe rather than outside it. And this God is expressed particularly in the principle of logic and rationality. Everything's contained in the physical universe. So like the Epicureans, there's no life beyond death. Think Mr. Spock on Star Trek and the Vulcans, and you've got Stoicism. And it's alive and well today, as a quick search on the internet will show you. So the Epicureans and the Stoics, and at points in his main speech here, Paul picks up points from Stoicism and Epicureanism, both in agreement and critique. So the takeaway here is that we need to engage with our culture. We need to sense the pain in God's heart over his creation turning away from him, a turning away that's expressed in idolatry of a variety of kinds. And we Christians need to engage with people to bring them the good news of Jesus, who's been raised from the dead and who's alive today. Because we're called, like Paul, to point people to the one true God.